If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Auto Buyer's Guide podcast episode. This is an on-the-road episode, and Travis, you are literally on a road somewhere.
Yeah, I am pulled off to a safe distance, and I'm hanging out in the Silverado EV.
Ooh la la, using General Motors hotspot Wi-Fi bandwidth. Are you, is it feeling hot or is it feeling spotty?
I've got the heated seat on, so I'm nice and comfortable. And so far, my phone says I have about mid-level 4G connectivity, but everything seems to be coming through okay.
Okay, I mean, you broke up there a little bit, but hopefully the viewers won't notice because we're doing some live recording locally. So we'll see if we can stitch this together into a believable episode. And speaking of believable episodes, tell us about your Silverado.
This is a lot of vehicle to live with on a regular basis. But I don't have any major complaints so far. I've got a few hundred miles under my belt and a few hundred more planned. I've already done a couple trips to Home Depot. We've got a big trip to the recycling center here in the next. So really trying to push this thing to its limits.
Now, here's my question. Does America need as many EV trucks as we have? And does General Motors need 3 of them?
It's to me, it's like 2.5, right? Because the Silverado and the Sierra are real similar in a lot of ways. Although we spent some time in the Sierra a couple weeks ago, and the interiors are very different. And I think I'm leaning towards that Sierra, personally. But the Hummer itself, that's obviously a different beast. We have quite a few electric trucks so far, right? We've got a Lightning, we've got the Rivian, we've got the 3 here. We have the Cybertruck out on the road. But there are still a few brands that aren't represented. Obviously, we have the Ram Rev coming up here soon, and the Ram Charger, which is going to be, call it a half-breed for the moment there. But we're missing anything smaller. I mean, Rivian's about as small as it gets, and that's really where I think I'd love to see a little bit more is a plug-in hybrid midsize or a full EV midsize. But I'm not going to hold my breath because the next upcoming truck, or at least that I'm aware of, is going to be the Scout. And I expect that to be pretty full size too.
Yeah, apparently the Scout's still not quite full sized. Apparently, so
it's that Rivian in between.
Yeah, it's the mid-sized truck.
Okay.
And this is actually kind of an interesting twist. Like when we really think about it, there are only 4 full-size trucks in America, from a cargo bed width standard and sort of generally accepted half-ton dimensions. It would be Silverado, Sierra. Hummer truck is pretty close. Bed's a little short, but it certainly is wide, as you'd expect it to be. And then we have the Lightning, because Cybertruck is not quite half-ton sized. The cab is closer to a mid-sized truck, a roomy mid-sized truck, but it's still a little closer there, especially in the backseat. Backseat legroom, headroom, et cetera, a little off. And then the bed dimensions are also a little bit funky. So it's I don't know, it's not quite half, but it's not really a mid-sized truck either. I don't know what we'd call that.
Yeah, I mean, dimensionally, it's a little bit more like Honda Ridgeline when it comes to where things line up, right?
Obviously,
it's
still a little bit. It's still bigger than Ridgeline.
Yeah, it's just, and it's a weird dimension. It's a weird shape, and even though realistically, it's got plenty of cargo capacity in the bed. The bed is a weird shape, so you can't use it for a lot of conventional shaped objects, especially things like campers, right? You're not going to be able to slide anything in there. A cargo cover, a slide in anything.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that especially the dimensions of the bed and the way that they decided to format this vehicle, no spare tire unless you give up a lot of bed.
Right.
So definitely, I would call it a 0.45 ton truck, something like. So close.
Nearly
so close.
there. 0.43,
Yeah,
but we're rounding up.
But why, is it bonkers that GM has 3/4 of the electric half-ton market covered?
I think so. But it's not that different than we see in their regular lineups, right? We've got a Sierra, we've got a Silverado, and they're doing very, very similar things. It's interesting to me that GMC has 2 separate models, right? Because we could have seen something like a Cadillac EVXT, but we don't see that. They went more hardcore direction. towards the off-road, and went with Hummer. Interesting to bring the Hummer back. Again, that's a whole thing in and of itself, but I don't blame them, and there's a little bit of variety between the two. I think as we get more trims, more variations between these models, that's where they'll start to differentiate themselves. Because I've got a badge here that says first edition. That's what all those Sierras were, those first editions, first runs. But I think when we get more towards the off-road or the performance-oriented, or you get the Denali trims, that's where things are going to start to differentiate themselves.
And it's super weird because it wasn't even the first edition. That was the work truck one with the vinyl floors. But,
Right, but you can't call that the first edition.
No, that would have been weird, but truthful,
Yeah.
But we have now dived too much into GM's over truckness. We should now segue neatly into Audi's Q6.
Yes.
Q6 is, I'm actually really intrigued by Q6 in a way, because we're starting to see sort of the filling out of the traditional automotive segments, especially in the luxury space with electric options. It's the most electric option dense. But this still leads to strange comparisons. And I found myself actually still making them and, arguing with the Audi folks a little bit on this. And I should ask you this question since you weren't there. In your mind, when you hear Q6 and you see it, and you know that it's around 187 inches long, I believe that's the dimension if I'm correct, what would you think a cross shop would be? Like if someone came to you and said, I'm looking at a Q6 e-tron, what else should I look at that's about the same thing?
Oh, at 187 inches, honestly, there are a lot of options there in the lineup. I mean, you could go look at something like a Lyric. That could be an option.
They're claiming too big.
Okay, I mean it's a little bit bigger, but how many inches is too big? But that's probably a different conversation for a different time.
That's not a family safe question.
Gosh, how far is the Q8? Right, that's not too much bigger, is it?
It is 193.
Okay.
And so they think that the Lyric is Q8 e-tron sized. So what's your next?
Gosh, you caught me on the spot, but I'm trying to think through here.
Because it's directly related to the Macan too.
Right.
So clearly, yeah, Macan, however we want to pronounce that.
Yeah.
I was leaning very Polestar 3, and they were like, no, that's Q8 sized. Model Y, they're like, no, that's smaller.
Well, and I can see those
and
not
cheaper.
being terribly cross-shopped, yeah. But sizing-wise, it's all pretty similar.
Yeah, Model Y's length is actually really, really, really the same, to be honest.
Yeah.
They were undoubtedly Model Y was the logical answer. There is some question. I was talking to actually a few other journalists there, and they thought, well, this is so much more expensive than Model Y, but this is one of the weird Tesla things. And I know you and I have discussed this. Is Tesla luxury? Is Model Y luxury or not? Because on the one hand, they would say, oh, well, I wouldn't buy this. I would buy the Model Y. And you're like, well, guys, if you're so segment specific, then why would you do that when you just argued with me that Tesla was not luxury? Because I think Tesla's a luxury brand.
And I tend to think they're on the premium brand end of things. But again, it's a difference without a need, right? But it's, when I think of luxury, I think of more niceties than you really get in a Tesla. It's almost just too simplistic to be luxury, even though there's a simple elegance. But again, I would put that more towards premium. So I would be surprised that Audi would start comparing it to a Tesla, because in my head that starts to downgrade that Audi product just a little bit.
I mean, Audi didn't come up and say, this is our Model Y killer. They would never do that. That's not Audi style. But when you talk to the product designers and planners, they were like, yeah, clearly there is a Model Y here, because it's the elephant in the room. It's the huge volume EV in this.
It gets pulled into every comparison just by default.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like BMW 3 Series gets pulled into every comparison everywhere because it used to be the elephant in the room,
Right.
And so that, I mean, it is such a weird thing when you think about it that way. But but your point to the luxury features, Q6 has a head-up display. It has more LCDs. It has, more screen real estate. It's got an 800-volt battery pack. So on the tech front, on the core electronics front, one could say it is more advanced because it has the 800, their newest 800 volt architecture from Audi and Porsche. Wicked fast charging, actually 21 minutes, 10% to 80% in a 100 kilowatt hour battery. So, I mean, compare that to Model Y and Model X and Model S. It is really, really quick.
Yeah, I would almost think of something like a Genesis GV60 and just seeing how that compares. Obviously, I think that's going to be a little bit smaller. But
Yeah, they're
again,
saying too small.
yeah, we're really down to the pulling out the measuring tape and saying no, this is too different.
Yeah, because they're trying to basically say, in Audi speak, they're saying that Q6 e-tron is solidly sort of Q5 territory. So like XC60, maybe GLC, that size. And they're saying that Q8 is the next step up from there. So that's EQE, BMW iX. That's where Q8 plays, or a future Q8 will play. And they're saying that Q4, even though Q4 is a little on the chunky side size-wise, they're saying that's really more of the electric Q3. It's the entry-level electric.
Yeah, but that still seems to fall in. I understand a little bit smaller, but in that Model Y category. So, like I said, I know the measurements come out, but no, that's interesting. Okay, I have no idea why, but my camera, I have no idea what happened. My screen went black, and then I shook the mouse and popped back
That's
up.
okay.
Great.
We're gonna leave the grinning Travis in there. Sorry, guys, for our technical difficulties. If you haven't seen the YouTube version of this, then you might want to see it, because I mean, it was not stuck on some sort of like face.
Well, that's when free frames always happen, is when you look your absolute worst, or you don't ever realize what you look like mid-sentence until you
This is like
stopped.
a full toothy Joker grin.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was. I mean, not bad. Your eyes were open, teeth are smiling. Good. So it's a good thing you went to the dentist lately. Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, do these luxury things like massaging seats, ventilated seats, head-up display, all that jazz, the nicer materials, the more interior color options, more exterior color options, frankly, too. The ability to Audi custom paint also available. Does that compensate for a lack of performance?
What kind of performance?
0 to 60, they're saying in the fastest model, it's basically a 4.56 strategy. So base models like 4.1 seconds, they're saying. Mid-level models, approximately 5 seconds. The slowest one is the base model with over 320 miles of range, and that gets you 0 to 60 in like 6 point something seconds, a little over 6 seconds. But it's big. I mean, it's big, it's boxy. It's got 30 cubic feet of cargo space in the back, plus a front trunk.
Yeah,
so they decided to make this like Audi SUV shaped.
Does the feature set make up for performance? I think so, yes, because I don't think performance is inherently a luxury requirement. Normally, luxury vehicles have pretty good performance. They tend to have a lot of power, even if they don't have the fastest 0 to 60 times. Obviously, they're getting some of the best, which includes the powertrain technology in theory. But that doesn't always equate to the best track car. So I think that's
just ask
probably
Lexus, right?
Right. Well, I think that's probably okay. And I do think, gosh, we're getting spoiled in the EV world if we're looking at 6 seconds and going, oh man, just dragging along,
And that brings us on to our next topic, which is Consumer Reports' latest product survey, because we're going to steer away from the EV thing just ever so slightly. They're in here too. But Lexus, Lexus used to be rated by Consumer Reports as not only one of the best brands, typically it was the most reliable. It was also hugely satisfying according to customers, et cetera. That's that classic, early 2000s Lexus result there. But Consumer Reports, and we're going to take a deeper dive into Consumer Reports fallibility and questions here, but intriguingly, when we look at Consumer Reports' latest survey, they gave us a best brands survey where, according to them, these are the top rated things. Then they gave us a reliability survey. So according to their viewers, their readers, these are the most reliable vehicles. And then they gave us a satisfaction number where, again, according to their readers, these are the vehicles that they would be most likely to buy again. And the greatest sort of juxtaposition of these scores here is Rivian, which got dead last in reliability, the least reliable new car brand in America, according to Consumer Reports, mind you. But the highest would buy again score on customer satisfaction. So literally the least reliable new vehicle in America is the most satisfying.
Yeah, and when it comes to best brands, it wasn't really in there. It's interesting to see kind of what this metric
I cut
is.
them off the list.
Right. It's one of those things where we're looking at what is it that people are looking for. And I will say, based on these reports, that Rivian's coming in quite a bit lower. I mean, it's basically half of the next best, and that's going to be Cadillac here on the list. But what are people looking for? Because it's understandable, not to excuse it, but it's understandable that you get essentially the youngest auto manufacturer in the United States having the most reliability concerns. But their people still love them, and it's kind of the Tesla effect. I mean, we saw that years and years back. I don't think anyone who's really shopping for a Rivian, drove it, loves it, is going to look at this and go, yeah, no, I don't think I'm going to get a Rivian. But the biggest thing for me is that satisfaction comes from if you're out at a restaurant and you get your dish and it's not what you ordered, and you say, oh, excuse me, I asked for, no onions on this or that on the side, and they say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Don't do that. They're going to spit on your food. That's when they spit. Don't do that.
Work with me on the analogy, right? When it comes back and they say, here you go, sir, everything's all set. Sorry for that inconvenience. You go, hey, that was a hiccup, but I am satisfied. I think that's part of what this survey says, is that if there's a problem with your vehicle, how are you being taken care of? And it seems like in this case, Rivian's doing a pretty good job of taking care of their people and having a product they're really down to give some wiggle room.
Yeah, now before I dive into this, I will just apologize for all the wait staff out there. I'm just kidding on that front. No, you don't do that. And if you ever see me at a restaurant, know that I love you.
And also, please don't do that.
So, and I also tip well. So you just gotta wait till the end. But so the answer on the rated brands is that we cut that list off at around 20 for the Facebook post. So if you go to consumerreports.com, if you guys are subscribers, if you aren't, I recommend subscribing to Consumer Reports because their data is only as good as the data from their subscribers. So all of our listeners out there that canceled their CR subscriptions, this is not dunking on Consumer Reports. It's not Consumer Reports' problem that their data set's limited. It's your problem for not giving your data to Consumer Reports. So
hashtag not an ad.
Yeah, so there. At any rate, Rivian, though, is number 31 out of 32 on their ratings. So the Consumer Reports staff really does not like Rivian, it seems like. But I will say the Tesla effect I completely agree with, because I think this is the similar thing to a lot of startups like Grenadier. There's, Ineos with the Ineos Grenadier. That's the Tesla effect as well. And we have so named it just because Tesla is the biggest success lately that has this huge volume.
Yeah.
But Fisker owners love their Fiskers. Ocean owners, I mean, in the after times, they love their things too. And I would say, I think that the reason that there's this disparity is products that are a passion project by one person or one small group just tend to have more emotion behind them. There's something emotional in a techie way about especially those early Teslas. They did something that no one else wanted to do. And it wasn't that no one else could do it, because let's be frank, there was nothing new about anything that Tesla has done so far.
Right.
It's that they said, why are we making boring, crappy electric cars? Why do we have a Leaf and an electric Ford Ranger with like 5 horsepower and a cheesy RAV4 that doesn't have all-wheel drive? And I'm talking about the first RAV4 electric, not the Tesla RAV4 electric, right?
And some of those are powered by Tesla, as it turns out.
Right. It's like, why are these things terrible? We don't need to have a terrible car. If you have a big enough battery in there, you could put out some serious performance numbers, because just like, hey, just let the motor rip, right? And it was that thing that really moved it forward. And a lot of companies, even with luxury arms, they had said, no, we're going to make a mainstream car. We want to make an electric truck for regular people. So they made this cheesy Ford Ranger electric thing. They didn't make a Lightning. I would argue that most of what we have seen now is because Tesla proved that's what customers actually want. And I think that's why we see, or used to see them higher on the satisfaction list. They're still pretty high. Tesla's still number 3. It's Rivian, BMW, Tesla, and Porsche in the top tier of owner satisfaction, apparently. But
Mhm.
Rivian's the only one that breaks 80%, and they blew past it at 86% would buy again.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that you see some more either premium or luxury uh, models here, some brands there at the top. The first one that isn't is actually maybe a little bit surprising to me, and that's Chevrolet as I sit here in that Silverado.
Mm-hmm.
But they're mixed in right there with Lexus and Lincoln, and it just feels like
Mm-hmm.
that's a that's a big plus for Chevrolet. Again, this is all just based on the data that's here, but that's a big plus because they're the first mainstream
Yeah.
non. I mean, a brand that you can buy a vehicle under $30,000, that sort of thing is certainly going to be significant. But then you look at the reliability, and you also see that we don't see the same numbers from some of these other
Mm-hmm.
luxury manufacturers as well. And again, to me, it just speaks to experience. I will say that what Rivian's done really is built off of what Tesla did from the startup side of things. They said, hey, they looked at the market and said, here's what Tesla is doing really well. And obviously, we're going to build a brand new electric vehicle. We need to make sure it's not competing directly with the Teslas. And they leaned into
Mm-hmm.
this adventure lifestyle. And they have a lot of fun with it. The last Rivian event I was at, people are excited to be there. They're enjoying the product. The cars have their own funky look to them, and not so drastic that it's caricature, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be made fun of incessantly, but their mascot is this little Sasquatch looking guy. They've got him as the performance badge. They're just
Mm-hmm.
having fun with it, and that's what you don't see from a lot of these
Yep.
manufacturers is having too much fun because fun is dangerous, right? Fun is a threat
Yep.
to the bottom line because if someone goes too far and doesn't enjoy it and they go that was too radical, then that hurts the books. And it's nice to see that there are still some brands who are shaking things up, and I think when we see the success of these brands, that's when we'll see some different stuff from your mainstream manufacturers.
And I think some of this also comes down to knowing your customer, giving your customer what they want, because you can know your customer and not give a crap, right? But
Yep.
knowing your customer, giving them what they want, that leads to seeming higher loyalty and greater customer satisfaction. Also, being responsive. Dealer network plays a big role into this. Um, but what I do find interesting as well is that the only company that's in the top 5 for both reliability and buy it again is Lexus.
Mhm.
That's kind of an okay, because that Lexus customer seems to really want reliability. That's what's making them happy.
Mhm.
But outside of that, in the top 10, it's only Subaru from the mainline brands. Honda and Toyota, they're quite far behind on this mismatch of reliability and satisfaction. On the would buy it again, Toyota's all the way down at 13 out of 24.
Mhm.
And let's see here. It's below Hyundai, below GMC, Ford, Genesis, Subaru, Lincoln, Chevy, Lexus, Porsche, Tesla, BMW, and Rivian in that escalating order.
Yeah.
But above Honda actually goes below that. Cadillac, then Kia, Volvo, Mazda, Acura, which kind of does surprise me because Acura fans seem really aggressive. And then Audi,
Mhm.
Buick, Ram, Chrysler, and Nissan in descending order, with Nissan at the bottom of the list.
Yeah. I mean, for me again, we've talked about these numbers just as what they are and what they miss and what they only can grab with what's available. But when you look at the top in reliability and the top in the best brand, again, it's just some weighted metric. It's still only the eighth. We're talking about Subaru. That's still only the eighth best would buy again, and it's like, what
Mm-hmm.
else do you want? Again, this metric has
Yeah.
obviously indicated something that people are excited about for their Subaru, and they're just not getting the same return on that basically.
And the interesting part about this is that even though they put Jeep last in on this metric, they're right down there with Mercedes. So
Hmm.
good company, I suppose, to be in, right? We're still talking over 50% of customers would buy again. So
Mhm.
it's not a huge loss. It's
Not
not
14%.
61%. Right. It's not
Yeah.
61% like Acura, but
Mhm.
it's also not 90% practically like Rivian. And this leads me down just a slightly different tangent here, which is reliability boring? Do the compromises that are required to make a car reliable, does that make that car boring?
Mhm.
Or is there something else going on?
Well, let me ask you this. I imagine there are some people in your life outside of work who say, "Hey, Alex, I'm shopping for a new car. what's one of the first things they say it needs to be? And for me, it's reliable. I want to make sure this is going to last. And we've had this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. That's a real relative concept, because number one, what a lot of people just don't seem to think off the top of their head is that, or think of, is that most of the parts in the vehicle are not made by the manufacturer you bought it from. Those are the same parts, the same window motors in this Chevrolet as it is for
Mm-hmm.
that Honda, et cetera, right? So they say, what's the most
Right.
reliable? And the question is, well, are we talking about small issues? Are we talking about large issues? Are we talking about what's going to cost you the least, or which one's going to spend the least time in the dealership getting repairs? That it's a very vague question, but people are always worried about it.
Exactly.
And the
Yeah, I
difference
will say
is
there's a
small
th-
between one of the most
yeah.
reliable and least reliable mainstream vehicles. We're not talking about leaps and bounds, entirely different product.
We generally are not, and it's worth now going in a little bit deeper into the Consumer Reports data. We'll do this in a future episode. So now, guys, if you're listening, now is the time to email us. You can email us to hey@autobuyersguide.com. You can wait till the end. There's going to be a phone number at the end of the episode there, where you can also leave us voicemails, and of course, comment section if you're watching this on YouTube. But we're going to be doing a complete episode with interviews from other people on reliability, et cetera. So just leave us your feedback. But on the Consumer Reports side of things, it's important to remember that their survey set has shrunk dramatically over the last few decades, especially. There once was a time where they had over 1 million responses per cycle. Actually, I think it was over 2 million, really not that long ago.
Hmm.
But this reliability report is based on 300,000 cars spread across 25 model years with thousands and thousands of different models and model variations. So
Mm-hmm.
spread really thin. And the result of this shrinkage in data is that once upon a very long time ago, Consumer Reports said you had to have a minimum number of vehicles to give a particular car, especially, a brand ranking. And that no longer applies. So we don't know how many vehicles are actually in the pool for any of these scores. It could be one. I hope it's not one, but they won't answer the question, so who knows?
Right.
But it's not 100 anymore for sure. We know that it's not that high. And that means there are huge glaring omissions. And I will just read this off really quick before we talk about this. So, glaring omissions in this data set are, for instance, second best-selling small luxury SUV, missing. GMC Acadia Terrain, missing. Those account for 20% of GMC's data. So GMC's down there 33% based on just the Sierra, even though large volumes in other products. Also
Right.
missing Wagoneer, Grand Wagoneer, Compass, Atlas, Atlas Cross Sport, Jetta, Golf, GTI, Golf R, Equinox, XC90, S90, V90, V60, any Volvo EV, G60, G90, G80, F250, F350, Armada, Kicks, Murano, Versa, Sentra, Escalade, XT4, XT6, CT4, CT5, Enclave, and Vista 2 Series, 5 Series, 7 Series, X1, X2, X3, X6, X7. Basically, just the X5 is in.
Mm-hmm.
A3, A6, A7, A8, Q3, Q8, Q4 e-tron, e-tron GT, Integra, ZDX, TLX. So basically, most of Audi's volume, most of BMW's volume, all of Mercedes is missing, because all of these brands are completely missing from the data. Alfa, Chrysler, Dodge, Fiat, Infiniti, Jaguar, Land Rover, Lincoln, Maserati, Mercedes, Mini, Mitsubishi, Polestar, Porsche, and Ram from those brand rankings in this reliability story here. Some of these are understandable. Like, I mean, does Fiat even sell cars other than like the free one they give you for leasing a Wagoneer?
Right.
But Mercedes being missing, Land Rover, Ram. I mean, Ram sells like 300,000 trucks a year.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wasn't able to keep track of that entire list, what we're really hitting on is that we're missing a lot of volume data from this set.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
the meat of some of these manufacturers' sales. So how can you judge a manufacturer when you're looking at a fringe offering, right? Or just not the most
Yeah.
popular model? This should always include at least the most popular model if you say, hey, what are we getting our information from? So
Mm-hmm.
it's still data. It's still something we can pull from. It's just how do you
Yeah.
talk about the Audi sedans when they don't cover most of the Audi sedans? You
Right.
know?
And it just means that if you are this person, and I'm not entirely clear how many new car shoppers rate reliability as their number one concern, because according to independent data like Cox Automotive Surveys and things like that, global mobility's data, reliability is usually not number one for the average car shopper. There's a certain shopper that is number one for.
Mm-hmm.
It's high on the list, but it's usually not number one. But the unfortunate thing is, and this is where I have bad news for all the listeners, there is no good data on reliability, I think, is the answer. If you want to compare everything from A to Z to one another, we do not have the data for that. If you want to know which Toyota is the most reliable Toyota, perhaps how Toyota and Honda compare against one another, good to go. Lots of data there. If you want to know how a Jeep compares against a Toyota, honestly, very little data there. Ram truck against a Tundra, no idea because it's not even included. So big gaps in the data as far as that's concerned. And that leads us down the road and the trouble road of what I hear a lot from people, especially folks on Facebook, not to single anybody out, but there was a whole bunch of people going like, that's why I prefer to talk to an independent mechanic. And here's the trouble with that on a data side. If we're talking about the way statistics and data works, there's just no data there. There's no there because the mechanic is only seeing cars that need to go to the mechanic, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about most independent mechanics, unless you take your car for an oil change there, then they're seeing maybe a different pool of vehicles. But a lot of independent mechanics tend to have brand allegiances. It's like you go to the independent European car shop or the independent Asian car shop. I don't know too many shops. There are a decent number out there, but I don't know too many in my neck of the woods that are very specifically generalists that will see anything from a Rolls-Royce to a Scion, right?
Not in any significant way. Yeah.
Nothing. Most of the ones, especially in the Bay Area, that I seem to see here and there, they'll cast wide nets. They're like all European cars, Volkswagen to Rolls-Royce. They'll do that kind of thing, but they're not really there for your Dodges, right? Or your Hyundai Kias. Like they're kind of different groups, interestingly enough, which does make sense because if you have a trained staff, they need to kind of be trained. If they were trained in everything, that's bonkers, right? You got to have a big staff for that, or just have someone really, really smart. But still, you're not seeing, especially vehicles that go to the Jiffy Lube. If I take my car, for instance, if I change my own oil or I take it to a lube joint for its regular maintenance, then the only time I'm taking it to an independent shop is when it's broken, right?
Right.
So they can tell you what kinds of problems they see frequently, but an independent mechanic absolutely cannot tell you, sorry, Scotty Kilmer, absolutely cannot tell you how reliable a particular brand is because they're not seeing all the cars that are not broken.
Right. I mean, I didn't know we were starting an internet war here at the end of 2024, but yeah, you're right.
Yep. And the bigger problem in a way for all of us as consumers, and this is the sad and unfortunate part, is nobody sees that level of data because Consumer Reports data set is so skewed heavily towards reliable, quote unquote, reliable brands like Honda and Toyota that they are missing a huge volume of everyday vehicles and more expensive luxury vehicles, right? And then on the opposite end of that, we have JD Power, which casts a really wide net. They could be the source for this data if they gave a crap, but they seem to not. Because they cast a very wide net. They send out surveys specifically to owners of models, people that have bought them, and they solicit enough responses to fill the appropriate data slots. Problem is, JD Power, they add in scores like, is your infotainment system doing whatever? And that's a little bit of a gray area. I would be okay with that if they separated it out because reliability to a lot of people, using this in air quotes, is, did my transmission fall out? Is my car making a weird knocking noise? Did a cylinder blow up? It's like, it's not, I don't like the way this infotainment system works. And with JD Power, there is this weird fuzzy factor where historically over time, some of their surveys have included sort of a do you find it difficult to use? And they call that a problem.
Which I can understand, but it's just not the same issue, right? And so when you start clumping these things together, that's where you get a big issue. The other thing that I wanted to mention, again, the question that I get is how reliable are they? And what people are asking is, well, how reliable is this brand new car going to be? And that's a really tough question to answer because it's a brand new car, right? There is no data on this brand new model the first year it comes out, or the second year, or the third year. Not really, right? Not significant data. And I understand the question. It's totally reasonable. For me, it's not like I don't care. It's not like I have all the time in the world. But if an issue comes up in my car in the first couple of years and it's covered under warranty, I'm going to be pretty
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with that. And I'm not going to count that as a huge knock against the vehicle, because assuming it all falls the way it should, then I'm not responsible for it. And oftentimes, if you go to the dealership, they'll get you a loaner car for the day, or that sort of thing is often available. Maybe just a lift to work and back, but still, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
huge inconvenience. So, is reliability, how much more does it cost you? Is it how many days it's out of service? Is it's covered under warranty? And it was an issue. Was it a recall? And it was something that
Yep.
was going to come up, but they essentially got ahead of it from extra testing, or the one time it happened to that one person, and they said, "Hey, we're going to go ahead and get this fixed." I don't consider a recall a reliability concern.
No.
It sounds like a
Generally,
found
no.
fault, and they're going to go ahead and fix it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like a recall could be a reliability problem, like Toyota's recall of engines. Obviously, a reliability problem. They were like,
Mhm.
"Ooh, failure rate on that part way high. We need to
Yeah.
we need to just bite the bullet because they're going to eat it in warranty repairs anyway.
Hmm.
Bite the bullet, take them all back, fix the engines." But missing page in your instruction manual, there are recalls for that. Literally, I had a recall that I'd never done on my Durango
Hmm.
because there was a page missing from the instruction manual. Who cares, right? That's just gonna go to the end of its days not being fixed. Well,
Yeah.
until it ever gets sold by a dealer. Um, and then software malfunctions. Is that a safe? That's not a reliability issue, quote unquote. Although, if you are a tech forward person, maybe that is a problem.
Hmm.
And that's where things get a little bit iffy. Like, Tesla creates a reliability problem, for instance, in a hypothetical world with their software because they created a bug, they push it out to all the cars.
Hmm.
Then they're like, oopsie, they fix that bug a week later. Is that a reliability problem?
Well, in some cases, it's a full recall, right? I mean, those are things we've
Yeah,
kind of talked
because it could
about.
be both. Yeah.
Yep.
But is that a reliability problem?
No, and it's a new. I think it is a new age reliability problem, depending on what the issue is. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
we often I'm sitting in a vehicle that was lent out to me for the week. We do a lot of testing on it, and sometimes we get different versions of software in these vehicles. Sometimes it's just a
Mm-hmm.
setting that the person before us went ahead and found that we don't know how to turn off. I pulled into my spot. I turned off the four wheel steer, and it turned itself back on, and then I turned it off, and after a little while, it turned itself back on. Right now, I don't know if that's an
Hmm.
issue. I don't know if that's a setting that it says to default on, and if you turn it off, it'll turn back on after a little while, because it's just trying to do that for 30 seconds to a minute or whatever maneuver you're pulling. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead and take a look at it later. But if that was an issue for me, and if I was somebody who was not incredibly tech literate, and I clicked that button and it came back, well, click the button, I touch the screen. If I turn that setting off and it turns itself back on, that could be a reliability concern, because I go, hey, there's something wrong with this vehicle. It's not doing what I asked it to. And what's the difference between that and a malfunctioning window switch? So I could see that being a
Yeah.
new age reliability concern, but it does kind of depend on which issue it is and how much it affects your day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the use case thing, which is also something that we cannot really explore in great detail. If you are ostensibly buying a Wrangler, this is not a modern time example, folks, because Wranglers have turned into RAV4s. This is an old Wrangler thing. Once upon a time, back when the Wrangler sold 25,000 units and it was only a two-door thing, and they were all being sold to people that did at least some sort of off-roading practically. Very few people, some people still did, but very few people really bought Wranglers without at least the intention of off-roading.
Mhm.
Their popularity exploded when they basically turned it into a family SUV for fun time weekendy things with your roof off. But back then, was it more or less reliable than a something else? You'd go, well, how do we separate its use here? Like, if you're actually taking it off-roading and you're using lockers, is it going to be more durable than a car that doesn't have lockers and only ever stays on the pavement? You know, Probably not, because that's a much
Mhm.
heavier use case, right? Your likelihood of
Mhm.
damaging things is higher. Also, when it comes to some questions in these segments, like if you're taking a look at, say, Grand Cherokee versus Highlander reliability. On the Grand Cherokee, you've just got so many more things that you cannot get on a Highlander. And
Mhm.
every time you add stuff, you're going to create at least the possibility for an unreliable item to creep in there.
Mhm.
The Jeep seats have more ways of motion. They've got massage. That's got an air suspension with adaptive dampers. They've got night vision, autonomous driving now in the Grand
Mhm.
Cherokee. They've got lockers. You can get every differential
Passenger
locking.
screens.
Yeah, passenger screens. So many screens. Why do we need this many screens? But all of that stuff, including the extra towing capability, et cetera, that's not only adding extra complexity, which breeds unreliability, you're also giving a customer a vehicle that can do more. It's
Mhm.
got a lot more power. So are they flooring it all the time? Is 480 horsepower or that bonkers 700 horsepower Durango, is
Mhm.
that going to wear through transmissions faster than a 240 horsepower Highlander? You betcha. So it's such an unanswerable question, and that's
Yeah.
what I think is the unfortunate part, because now we've been talking about reliability for what feels like an hour, but it's probably not that long. And you
No,
can't
certainly
have
not.
this kind of conversation with someone that's like, I just want a reliable car.
Right. It's such a broad spectrum as to what do you mean. Honestly, it's the same question. It's similar to, and I won't go too far off, but what's going to get me the best gas mileage? Well, the first question is,
Mm.
where are you driving? The second question is, how do you drive? Because there is a beautiful clip from a classic people might have heard of. It's called Top Gear, where they drive a Toyota Prius flat out around their track and they measure how much fuel it uses. And then, I mean, and flat out as fast as it possibly can. And then they take a BMW, I think it was an M3, not just a 3 Series, and they go drive to that same point, the same time. And it turns out that the Prius used more fuel than the M3. It's an extreme example, but the whole point is if you are someone who puts your foot in it or has to go this fast all the time, if you're getting an underpowered car or a less powerful, more efficient car,
Mhm.
you're not going to get that out of your driving experience. You might as well get basically the engine that matches your foot because that's going to be built for your use case. And it's not always one to one, but it's just we got to know more information before we can help you out. But that's what we're here for. We do our best to get you that info.
Yeah, and this is not to take anything away from, again, Consumer Reports and their data set, because their data set's dwindling, just like a lot of print publications are, unfortunately. And they don't seem to have made the digital divide because even though there are online subscribers, people online tend to not want to pay for things. I mean, we have almost 1 million subscribers, and how many of them pay us every month? Very few,
Yep.
because ads, right? So that's the answer: is you have Google throw some ads on there, and that's how you make this whole jazz work.
Yep.
But from a business model standpoint, that makes their job very hard. And then on the opposite side, I think the consumer, maybe Consumer Reports is rightly recognizing this, but the consumer oftentimes doesn't care to know the backstory. They're just like, I just want an answer. I don't need a dissertation on this for an
Mhm.
hour. I just want to know, is my Corolla going to blow up or not? Right? Logical, because that's probably what I would ask.
Yeah. Yeah. Good news.
um,
Probably not. Yeah.
right. But then the sad part is that I think Consumer Reports does not do a good job really defending themselves or explaining themselves. Like, how many cars are in a sample set? How big is the sample set for each manufacturer? They don't want to tell us that. They haven't said ever, we have this many responses from Toyota owners, this many responses from Jeep owners, this many responses, et cetera. And we don't have access to any of the raw data for anybody else to check it out and verify it. They don't work with other partners in that way for any sort of data sharing model. It's all very proprietary, all very isolated. And then they don't try and make qualifications ever. It's not like they're out there going, Jeep is the least reliable brand in our testing. Actually, it was Rivian this time around, but they're saying, but they don't say like, but these are all early builds. Are these all first year Rivian R1Ts? Because there is some
Mhm.
data set missing in their stuff. Like, are these all first gens? Probably. Are these all early first gens? Who knows, right?
Right.
So that's the tricky part there, is we just don't know enough to know, like, what does this number actually mean? And does it mean that you should be worried about buying a new second generation Rivian because predicted reliability is, as I always say, crystal ball reliability. Since
Right.
that second gen has had so many major changes, reliability on the first gen doesn't always tell you everything.
I mean, even just to add one more complexity just to the question is how many issues are first gen issues, and how many of those issues are from early build issues, and how many of those overall number are the same vehicle coming in for a variety of different issues with the same issue multiple times. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating. Honestly, to me, it's fascinating. It's sort of like when you look at the divorce rate, and then you look at how many divorces are people getting divorced a second and a third time versus someone who's never gotten divorced, who's obviously not going to add to that number at all. So it's the beauty, the complexity, and the challenge of looking at wide range data sets and trying to garner something from it.
Yeah, data's complex, guys.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in vehicles like actually the Rivian's actually really still a perfect example. Sorry to keep hammering on this one, but if you've got a Rivian and you have the choice of the dual motor, the quad motor, the tri motor, etc., different battery packs, different battery pack chemistries, even among them. Is the data set here representative of the sales volume? Have we have equal representation? Because Rivian did not make the first motors, the quad motors in-house, but they did make the dual motors. And now they've moved on to different quad motors. And now there's a tri-motor, et cetera. Like, how does that relate? In some ways, it's easier to see manufacturers like Toyota's reliability because they build so many of the exact same engine. I mean, their hybrid system is used in everything. And then
Including non-Toyotas.
space, including non-Toyotas. And of course, their 2.5-liter engine that hybrid system uses is used in a whole bunch of other stuff with some little bitty tweaks here and there. So it's a very, very common engine platform. And that does make it easier to see. There's less variation, I should say, as well. So it's something that's easier to see, reliability on. But if you take a look at, for instance, the previous generation Grand Cherokee, where you had, depending on the year, you had a V6, you had a diesel V6, and you had not one, not two, but 3 different V8 engines jammed under that thing, multiple different transmissions, because it wasn't all the same 8-speed. There were a whole bunch of different 8 speeds, depending on the torque levels. They had no less than 4 different transfer cases, bunches of different axle ratios. Is that is it the front axle with the locker, or is it the rear axle with or without the locker? Which one of those with the locker is? Because they weren't all the same rear axle either. So it's like there's so much more variation in there that it does lead you to wonder, like, how does this skew? And it could be good, it could be bad. I mean, maybe the Grand Cherokee is so much less reliable than we possibly imagined, because in this data set, they're only capturing the V6 owners that aren't going to drive their cars hard. And, maybe the ones with the bigger V8s were really, really bad. Who knows?
No, these are all great questions. And that's what we're here to do, is to kind of take a look at some of these things and try to find answers. But inevitably, we may just end up going in circles.
Yep. And if that all leaves you dissatisfied, I am sorry for that. We are dissatisfied as well. And with that, it's probably time to sign off, Travis.
Yeah, I think I've still got a little bit of battery in this vehicle, but I'm losing daylight, so I got to make the most of it while I have it.
If we had thought harder about this, you could have DC fast charged for 49 minutes, and then you would be full.
Do the live timer and just see where we're at different intervals. Maybe next time. Next time I'm going to
maybe next time.
Well, and it's just a few days away before I fly down and do my own big road trip. We're taking our Volvo C40 from San Jose all the way up north of Portland, and that's going to be a little bit of time on the road.
We are. That will be a lot of charging stops. I am going to go for that because, 200 real world miles of range, if you're treating it nicely, is not going to get you very far on a road trip. But
I do treat it pretty nicely, so we will find out. But then you'll just have to stay tuned for when those videos hit our channel.
Overinflate those tires, tape all the seams, wax it.
That's tampering
Lower
with the data
suspension. Cut some springs, slam that puppy down to the ground.
If it looks different when I bring it back, don't ask any questions. Everything's fine.
Cover the grills up front. Take off the side mirrors.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'll go on a diet starting now.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but at least you understand.
Oh, well, thank you, Alex.
And with that, hopefully everybody has stuffed themselves and is saving themselves for the food coma break between Thanksgiving and Christmas. There may or may not be another live show between now and Christmas. So if there isn't, Merry Christmas Kwanzaa to all of you, and we will see you on the
Happy
flip
Honda
side.
Days and Merry Toyotathon.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide.